Hey, good afternoon. This week has been quite a bit. We got some really, really strong jobs numbers out last week and a little bit of conflicting data here this week. We had also a very strong business indicator kind of tip the favor, I guess, towards what may be ahead as well. So want to jump right into it. My name is Brandon Steele, financial advisor with Mainsail here in Bellevue. Hope everyone had a great Easter and were able to and enjoy the kind of nice weather we had over the weekend and maybe a mimosa or two to celebrate. Let's jump right into it. Last Friday, the markets were closed, as you may remember. So even though that was the case, there was still a very, very important piece of economic data that came out. So on Friday, non-farm payrolls numbers came out. And the jobs number was huge. It was 916,000 jobs added in the month of March. Huge tick up. That is huge improvement from what we've seen. For those who have been kind of following us lately, what you've heard is we had these big jumps after COVID and it's kind of plateaued. So it was awesome to see that some of those jobs finally got back to, or some of those people finally were able to get back to work. But it's kind of like plugging up this hole where I think we're pulling out a little more water than is being let out. But it's like a constantly growing or shrinking hole, and so it's really interesting to see what happens. And not to tip the cards here a little bit, but we'll talk about some jobs data on the flip side of this coin here in just a minute. Before we get to that, on Monday we had the ISM number come out, which is basically a servicing number, a sign of servicing to businesses. And this came back at a very, very strong number. So it's a very good sign of kind of business getting back to full speed. And what we saw as a result of that and the jobs number was Monday, the markets just kind of jumped up. They spiked quite a bit. Fast forward through the rest of the week. Tuesday, we had IMF World Report showing basically their expectations for the world's growth to come. There were a lot of revisions up, and especially in the US, a pretty significant revision up. And then Wednesday, just yesterday, we had the Fed minutes come out. Basically, the gist of it is the same story we've been talking about from the beginning of COVID, basically. They came out, they said, the economic outlook looks great, but what was their exact quote? I believe it was something like, it will likely be some time before they make any changes. So although things are looking good and things are heading in the right direction, it's very clear the Fed's stance is that they're still going to continue to do their programs and kind of keep doing what they're doing. My concern, I just wonder, when is this scenario good enough for them to pull that back? Because the longer this goes, the harder it is going to be for them to pull back on these programs without completely upsetting the markets. So that's the big thing to watch. I realize we still have some challenges, but I'd like to maybe hear soon that they're hinting at least at what's to come. On top of that, today we had initial jobless claims come out, and the number was not good, 744,000, which is a jump up and worse than expectations. So it's funny, we see these great jobs numbers and then kind of flip around to 4 days later, and we get news the other way around. I think that, this could be potentially a result of, opening back up. We saw in March, maybe a lot of states open back up and a lot of jobs get back to work. And then what we may be seeing is a result of the cases spiking and, restrictions based around that. So it'll be very interesting to watch what's ahead here. We also had the Fed chair, talk on basically the IMF World Report. Same thing from the minutes, basically that things look good, but there was no hints at decreasing their purchasing of assets or raising rates anytime soon. In fact, I believe he even said something about they don't plan to even hint at that anytime soon. So, it looks like more of the same, basically. It was kind of a relieving week so far. We still have tomorrow, so, I don't want to hold my breath, but it seems like over the past month or two, I'd go grab a cup of coffee, and by the time I got back to my desk, markets were complete 180 from where they had been just 2 minutes ago. This week, it feels like a little more steady kind of march, so that can be a good thing. Hopefully that's a sign of, a little more stability. But I think probably more likely than that, what's happening is it was a much lighter week in trading. And so maybe we have a scenario where people are kind of waiting to see what's next. So pay attention. I think that what that means is, good news, bad news, whatever comes out is going to drive a lot of what may be ahead. And it's certainly something to really pay attention to. Coming up next week, we'll touch on consumer price index, or kind of a measure of inflation. And we'll also talk about retail sales numbers coming out next week. So before that, let's jump into the question of the week. And thank you guys, as always, for your information around this, your submittals on this. If you do have a question of the week you'd like us to cover, you can email us info@mainsailfg.com. So this month is Financial Awareness Month. And so this week's question of the week is around that topic. I thought this was really good. And basically the question is, how do you teach your kids financial literacy? Now, I want to step back and say I do not have kids, so bear with me a little bit. I'll do my best here, but as you might imagine, it may be easier to learn from somebody who's been in those shoes. So I don't want to pretend to know that I know how it is to raise kids. That said, I think that from a financial perspective, I may be able to give some thoughts. I think one of the biggest things that comes out of this is to share with them early on. I think that money is one of those topics that is hardly ever talked about. I know for sure in my family, it really was not a topic of conversation. But my opinion is that the earlier on that you bring those conversations to the table and introduce kids to money or money topics, the further ahead that they will be and the more comfortable they will be with that over their lifetime. I think it's also important to use the right terms. So in fact, we have a podcast coming out. Actually, it's live now. We're going to share it coming up here soon. But if you go to our website, you can catch it. But basically, Elise Bowie had joined us, and she had shared some of her thoughts on this and what she has done with her kids. And the biggest takeaway I got was using the right terms. So rather than allowance, for instance, let's call it earnings, right? Show that there is some work to be done to reap those fruits, basically. Rather than take, you might use other words. Those types of things that seem like really small changes, but I think, especially with kids, they're, like sponges, can really kind of make an impression on them over their lifetime. And then the third thing I would mention is to maybe incentivize them for the right things. So it doesn't always have to be chores or things like that, but maybe it's doing the right thing. Maybe it's whatever the case may be, but showing that there can be value in some of the things that they may be doing already in the first place may be helpful. Doesn't mean you gotta, pay out your kids all the time, but I think you get where I'm going with that. So again, this is, I think, a very, very important topic, and it's very on topic for the month of financial awareness here in April. So go ahead and go to our website if you want to check out our latest podcast with Elise Bowie, and we will also be sharing that here soon. But we have just put together a podcast on this exact topic, and we'll be looking forward this month to sharing more and more on financial literacy to just kind of get those conversations going and hopefully help in terms of getting everybody just that little extra level of education. So thank you guys for joining us here this week. We will see you next Thursday, same place at 3 p.m. And if you have any question of the week, again, go ahead and send them to us, info@mainsailfg.com.